The game lived up to the hype, and now can it deliver in the aftermath? A haunted mansion delivers a grave digger, and Gig 'em got their guy after a near miss. This is the College Game Day podcast from Monday, November 27th, just after Thanksgiving weekend, and a rivalry weekend that delivered a lot of intrigue, but not a lot of shakeup. Rece Davis and Pete Thamel with you. And Pete, we'll get to your Super Bowl day, which is Sunday, the day after the regular season concludes, and all of the coaching changes that went on and the trickle-down effect as a result of that. But the game where we were on Saturday for College Game Day, Ohio State and Michigan, Wolverines win their third straight against the Buckeyes in excruciating fashion for Ohio State, who made the critical mistakes that cost them the game. And now the Harbaugh suspension is over as it relates to the Big Ten. It's over for this season. Full strength Michigan is back. Ohio State's out of the mix in terms of the college football playoff. I mean, the set of circumstances that would have to come together for them to get in as a one-loss non-champion are extraordinary. Nothing like the stage last year. So now the Michigan story continues in a different vein. Whether they can get over the hump and actually win a postseason game, not counting the Big Ten championship game, and actually win a championship.
What an atmosphere there on Saturday. Just that place was electric. It was a special backdrop, right? Like, this was going to be the last time this game had these stakes. The game will always be awesome. It'll always be that. So it felt a little different there on Saturday. It was a lot of fun to be on the sideline. That in the past years, I think has been maybe a bit of a wine and cheese crowd here and there. And it was not that on Saturday. Like, it was jumping, absolutely jumping. Awesome scene, awesome venue, awesome backdrop. And to what was a great game. I really think that, you mentioned full strength. Like, with Sharon Moore coaching, they seem pretty strong. I mean,
they do. Absolutely.
He did an unbelievable job. He pushed every right button. Remember, he's calling plays. First time head coach, you're also calling plays. You're juggling the clock. You're handling it, and he handled really everything deftly. I did one of those breakdowns going into the game where I talked to scouts and coaches, Rece, and ultimately, I remember one scout texted me. I said, "Why do you think Michigan's going to win?" He said, "Quarterback and offensive line." That was it. And I was like, if you had to really distill it down to two things, I think those would be the two things. But that was a classic. I'm not, I don't know that rivalry well enough for a century to rank them or anything. But if that's not a top 5 Ohio State Michigan game of all time, I don't know. I was there in 2006, which was obviously awesome. But boy, like the tension was great. There were momentum swings. There were huge play calls. There were gutsy play calls. You really, I went into look. Michigan has played 2 games where they were challenged this year. I thought one of the great points that an opposing assistant coach made to me in that buildup was, he's like, I don't really know if these teams can guard good receivers because they haven't played any all year. And he said, who's the best receiver in the Big Ten who's not on Ohio State or Michigan? And I made a long pause and started Googling. I think Williams on Illinois. Maybe it's just not, there just are not a lot. There are some years in the Big Ten where there's some great. This is not one of them. So I thought that was it was just really interesting about Michigan because we didn't know, right? There was just some stuff that we didn't know. Was really impressed with their D tackles in person and the push they got on their interior D line. Graham is awesome. Mason Graham, like what a disruptive player, kind of player you can feel on the sidelines the same way when you and I sat there and watched Georgia on the sideline last year. So anyway, just really, really impressed by Michigan. And you wonder, is this the best of their 3 playoff entrants? Which I don't think we would have said going in, but now I think you have to, like, now that they've been pressed a little bit, I think that's it's a more fair question.
I thought their offensive line played great as well. I'm still not sure that it is as good as the previous 2 offensive lines, but they don't have to be. They can still be really good and not be that, because arguably those were the 2 best offensive lines or the best offensive lines in the country each of those 2 years. The big difference, I think, with them is McCarthy has another year under his belt, very confident. I still wonder about them, why they're not utilizing that passing game a little bit more. He made a throw in the first half to Wilson that I was like, dude, I mean, it was
about the touchdown where he split the guys.
Yeah. It was, it was.
How did that thing get through?
And it was an elite throw. Yes. So any idea that was sort of percolating in back channels, before the game that he wasn't 100%, he wasn't this or that. I even asked Sharon about it on game day and got
By the way, his smile when you asked him was
unbelievable.
He's good. He's good. And
big Cheshire grin. I was sitting right next to him, and I was had the show in my ears, and I was laughing. I was like, that smile says a lot. I will say this, and I'll let you keep going. I stood with Jess Sims in the first series, someone who knows body movement pretty well, and I said, "Is he a little gimpy?" And she was like, "He doesn't. His gait looks a little off." And then as the game went on, it did not appear to be the case.
Yeah, it's I think sometimes that happens. Whether it's adrenaline or just getting loose or getting hit a few times, something like that. And you kind of put it to the side. Now, how he was on Sunday, who knows? But the good news for Michigan is that it doesn't appear, to be terribly serious, certainly not serious enough to keep him from playing. And then once they get through the Big Ten championship game this weekend, which all due respect to Iowa is a foregone conclusion in terms of the outcome. They've done a wonderful job to get to double-digit wins, and they've got no shot.
Think about all the injuries they've had.
Yeah, right. They're not even full strength.
Not even close.
Some of their best players.
All their best players.
Playing. Yeah.
All their best players. Cade McNamara, Eric Gall, Cooper DeJean, they're gone.
Yeah.
It's too bad.
Yeah. So you respect what they've done. They don't have any chance of matching up with Michigan in this current state. Maybe at full strength, they slow down the game, ugly it up, but this is not going to happen for them. So Michigan's going to the playoff. And, then by that time, I would assume that if there is as we said in the South when I was growing up, a hitch in his get along, then that should be all gone. And he was still good enough to make some big time plays, man. And I was once again impressed with him. And as you know, I had them number one in the preseason. At this moment, I don't know that I believe they're better than Georgia. But I do believe this. I believe when they line up, if and when they line up on the field, they're fully capable of beating Georgia. So we'll see. We'll see how.
So you would think they'd be 1-2
if it shakes. If Georgia beats Bama, and then 3-4 is where there's quite frankly a lot of mystery, right?
A ton, and we can get into that a little bit today, and certainly later this week about how that's going to shake out.
Sounds like a Bill Connolly assignment.
We need Bill here to dial it in.
Yeah, my thing is this, and Florida State, people got very upset with me, acting as if I was trying to keep them out. My only point about Florida State was that the committee is not doing its job if it doesn't evaluate the Seminoles in their current form with Tate Rodemaker at quarterback. They're simply not doing their job. And so they have to do that. It doesn't mean that he won't play well enough. They weren't great on offense Saturday night by any stretch of the imagination, but they won the game. Now there's another week to see it. I do think that they were close enough to functional that you don't overly penalize them. You certainly do not disqualify them because Jordan Travis is not there based on what we saw Saturday night. And then we'll see again this Saturday night when they play Louisville, if they measure up. Frankly, if they measure up, it's not an unreasonable. The only unreasonable take that I would see among all of those teams vying for it, I wouldn't think, for instance, if Texas wins the Big 12, that it's unreasonable to say, I think Texas is the better team in its current form and putting them in over Florida State. The only real unreasonable thing is I don't see Alabama going in over Texas. It's almost like Texas either has to lose or Texas and Alabama have to go together. Yeah. If Alabama wins, and that's certainly in question too.
I want to go on the record now, and
there's a lot of Florida State stuff that's popping up. If they are an undefeated conference champion, I think they should be in the playoff. I do. They tested themselves in the early season, and they played a very good LSU team. They beat the brakes off them. I understand with Rodemaker, they're not whole, but it is really hard to go undefeated. I don't care what league you're in. I don't care where you are. If you are an undefeated power conference champion with a top 10 win in the out of conference, I think it would be a shame if they ended up 5 somehow. I just think that would be. I would just think that would be wrong.
Florida State fans, listen to what I'm saying carefully. I tend to agree, but not for that reason. It is hard to go undefeated, and that should be a mark in your favor, but it does not determine everything. The idea with a small playoff is to get the 4 best teams. And if those 13 people in that room think Texas is better, or more of them do, that is not an unreasonable take. Now, the big advantage you have over Texas is that you are undefeated. So it counts. You're going to get weeping and gnashing of teeth if that happens. And people say, what did it even matter that they played those games? It matters because we put the committee in place to have some football judgment. And I want to see all of the data. I want to see how Texas plays, because Texas has certainly had some stumble around moments. I mean, you don't want to be overly swayed by blowing out Texas Tech, of all people.
Can you imagine Gundy
in the press conference if he sends Texas off? Like that would be the most. He would have quips. He would have like a lifetime of Spurrier quips in one post game. I mean, that would really be a career maker for him to send the Longhorns off after they ditch them for the SEC in that moment. Woo!
And think about this, Pete. I was going to bring this up, and I'm glad you mentioned that. He sent Oklahoma away twice this year, because he sent them away by beating them. He ends the Bedlam rivalry. Mm-hmm. Now he's in position to knock them out of the Big 12 championship game, and it looks as if he's opened the door to let them back in. The Sooners have once again vexed Gundy and taken something away from him. They were down to BYU 24-6, if memory recalls. If my memory is accurate. And then he took it away from Oklahoma again. So he has not only taken his team to the Big 12 championship game, he has bounced Oklahoma twice. He ended the Caleb Williams, Lincoln Riley era at Oklahoma by sending them away. He's ended their Big 12 era and taken the championship opportunity away. And now there is one more mountain to climb. You're right. If he does that, I want Bedlam to continue, but if I were the man in the mullet wearing the orange on the sidelines, I would never play either of them again. I'd play anybody else. I'd go play Georgia and Alabama and Notre Dame, play anybody in the world except those two, so you can lord it over them for the rest of your life, because heaven knows he's taken enough stuff from Oklahoma people for his record against them, and he's been part of the staffs that have coughed up and maybe even head coach a couple of times when they coughed up ridiculous leads against Texas. Vince Young, I think they were up 35-7 and got beat. And so if he could get that as not only press conference gold, I would thoroughly advise him to refuse to play them in any bowl game that's not a playoff game. Obviously, play them then, but any other time that you don't have to play them, never play them again, and just walk away and lord it over them for the rest of your life.
I was sitting there Saturday night and I was like, you know what? That A&M thing's still in flux. And I was like, if he hadn't self-sabotaged his career with his public persona and comments, he's the guy who could go unlock that place. Like he really, yeah. Right. Like now it's his own fault that he's not, getting considered for a lot of these jobs, but I was just
I'm not sure that's the way it should be either, too, because if he's made missteps, he's apologized for a lot of them. Sure. So
he is positioned. I guess I'll say it this way: he has positioned himself where he's so much of a wild card that people don't want to take the risk. The antics on a bigger stage that's what people are scared of. Now, look, there's people who've dove in and people who Tennessee, Florida. He's milked enough people for raises and taken them to the goal line. And then bailed, where you don't want the football. Who's the character who takes the football away from
Lucy? Takes it away from Charlie Brown.
Thank you. Yeah. That is like a wheelhouse Rece Davis reference right there. Yeah. Lucy taken away. Like at a certain point, you're not going to try to kick the ball from Lucy if she keeps taking away, and that's what he's done. But I was just like, you know what, man? Like tip your hat to Mike Gundy. That guy, as they're roaring back against BYU, it's like that guy can coach, man. He can coach.
He can, and Ollie Gordon can run.
The
one thing I wasn't sure watching that game at the end, I was like, should he try to win it right here? Because generally speaking, with the new overtime rules, you have to go for 2 the next time anyway. I'm generally in favor of trying to win it right there, especially with Big Zero. He didn't, and it worked out for him very well. There was certainly some reason to extending that game. He was the better team. So more plays, better team, go ahead. But when you come back like that too, there was a lot of me that said, why don't they just give it to 0 again and win or lose it right here? But they're going back. We'll have plenty of time to talk about their matchup with Texas and the last time that Oklahoma State was in that building playing for a Big 12 championship game. They came up about 2 millimeters short, right on that play against Baylor at the end, and what was a classic, great football game, very entertaining game. So he'll have another chance to win the Big 12 for the last time in this iteration of it. What did you, before we move off of this, who do you think is, because we started this with Texas and Florida State, and I'm not advocating for either. I think choosing Florida State, as you said, if they're undefeated, is perfectly reasonable, and I think would be a no-brainer if Travis were there. And Rodemaker may play well enough against Louisville where it also becomes not only reasonable but preferable. But right now, if they lined up on the field, who do you think would win the game, Texas or Florida State?
Right now, if they lined up on the field, I think Texas would win. Quinn Ewers is playing really well, kind of quietly. And he's been really efficient. Their skill has come together. Their O-line is gelled. I would probably think them. Who would win, Rece Davis? Texas or Oregon?
That's a good one,
because that's going to be a debate here, Rece.
Yeah, that's going to be
that's one of those. If that's the debate for 5, you're splitting the hairs.
This is one, Pete, I generally lean on who the better team is. Mm-hmm. Football judgment, if the resumes are similar. Mm-hmm. And I think the resumes in this will cause some wailing and weeping and gnashing of teeth. I think the resumes are very similar. In that game, I would probably pick.
It's hard.
Yeah, I'd probably pick Texas.
Interesting.
To win the game, barely, but maybe. But I would probably lean, if I were sitting in that room of 13, assuming both play well, in their respective conference championship games, because every data point has to matter when you're this close at this point. So if they get down the stretch and they both finish well and they get there, probably the thing that would carry the day for me would be Texas win in Tuscaloosa. And that would probably be, you're splitting hairs at the margins. I prefer them to lean on football judgment, but if the football judgment says the two teams are equal, then you have to get to the resume, and both resumes are really good. I believe that there are more good teams, meaning, combination of championship teams and upper middle class teams, if you want to phrase it that way, in the Pac-12. I think there are more there than any other conference, and that includes the SEC. And I know there's wailing and weeping and gnashing of teeth now. A couple of teams in the SEC are really good, and it's close. Yeah. But I don't think Oregon's resume is outlandishly behind anybody's. But I do think in a singular one data point that could make a difference, Texas went on the road in Tuscaloosa, as Sark is already using to lobby, probably carries the day for me.
Yeah, I think if you take the previous 9
CFP debates and the drama of them, this one is double the previous 9 combined. I was not good at algebra, but there was really only one decent debate year one. And there was some split. There was an Ohio State, Alabama year along the way. And you obviously did all the shows, so you're going to remember it more than me. But this is awesome going into championship weekend. There has never been a better championship weekend in the CFP or BCS era than this weekend. And look, there have been some dog championship weekends. I'm going to be blunt, right? There have been some times where you're just sitting there being like, oh God, here we go. You know what I mean? Let's play out the perfunctory. No. The drama is real. It's high. And how you play, style points, it matters, man. It's going to really matter this weekend. You have to win. You have to win authoritatively. You have to look good doing it. And there is going to be some really, really hurt people with great cases on Sunday morning. Great
really,
pace.
there were, to your point, that year in 2014, Baylor and TCU were deserving of being in the playoff. So was Ohio State. All three were. Falling back on who would win the game, although Gary Patterson would get red in the face and yell at me forever making this debate, I probably would have picked Ohio State to win the game, and did think that was, I won't say the right call, because I also think TCU would have been the right call. TCU lost to Baylor. I felt as if they were the better team. Sometimes they played a great game and TCU didn't win, So, but I thought TCU was the better team that year, and sort of bowl. They certainly made a statement in the bowl that year, annihilating Ole Miss, as I recall.
Yes.
So that they were all worthy. The other years that people go to, the one you mentioned, Ohio State had, in my judgment, what was, if you were splitting hairs among teams, a disqualifying loss. They got blown out. People often reference 2016, Penn State Big Ten champion didn't get in. Ohio State did get in that year, that way, and got shut out by Clemson, I believe. But that year, Penn State, it wasn't because they had two losses. It was because the second year, or the second loss, was to Michigan, and they lost by 39 points. Yep. Those types of losses, to me, are sort of disqualifying, if you get annihilated like that. The teams that we're talking about this year, Texas lost on a drive for the ages and a throw to the end zone in traffic. And, I don't remember the final score, but they were ahead. It lost by 4, I think, 3 or 4. Oregon lost by 3, in a hostile environment on the road, and what was a great football game against, by the way, another team that we're just assuming in many quarters will lose to Oregon Friday night, and they might not.
Did you see that line, Rece?
It's like Oregon minus 9.5.
I mean, I was blown away by that line.
It's because Washington has sort of stumbled around. I still don't think that they've won a game. It's been like 2 months or something, like a month and a half since they won the game by more than double digits.
Yeah.
And I mean, we're talking, and by, I think they won one game. You know what? They beat SC by 10. That's their biggest margin of victory. They stumbled around with Stanford. They stumbled around with Arizona State. That's why the line is what it is. But if Oregon puts together a performance like the one we saw in Seattle, they can win the game again for sure.
I got a text yesterday from Troy Dannon, the athletic
director at Washington. He said, I've been the AD 7 weeks and we've won 7 one-score games.
Right. And I mean, it's it's right there on the edge. And like even the Stanford game, which I think they won maybe by 9, memory serves. Yeah. Then that game, Stanford ran a play on 4th down. There was a guy wide open. The ball hit him in the chest, and he just squirted through and he dropped it. They might have won the game. I mean, it's so I understand why the line is what it is, but I also think that Washington is so talented and explosive that if they put together their A game the way they did that afternoon in Seattle against the Ducks, they can win again.
Well, I'm not picking against Kalen DeBoer much anymore, man. You know what I mean? Like, that guy has proven he can win football games. He won them at Sioux Falls. He won him as a coordinator at Eastern Michigan. He won big at Indiana. Like, I hope Tom Allen sends him a nice bottle of wine when he gets his 15-5 buyout from the $20 million, because he helped that dude win some football games. So did Michael Penix, by the way. Kalen DeBoer is great football. How about that 4th and 1? Like, that's like one of the great play calls of the season.
Yeah. I mean, and just
I almost fell off my couch.
I mean, we're trying to win a championship here. It's like, and the thing was, how about the quote after the game? Michael had options on the play. He chose the right one. You want to talk about putting trust in your veteran quarterback?
Yeah, that was that was all timer. That was
when we're doing our picks on game day Saturday morning. The sidelines of the big house. Aiden Hutchinson was our guest picker. Came to the Apple Cup game, and Hutchinson, I don't know if you heard him. He said, "Man, I played against Michael Penix when he was in Indiana." Said he is a baller. So I mean, this is a guy that had the respect of, one of the great defenders in recent years. And, I think I favor Oregon to win the game, but I can go ahead and make this prediction for the picks pod later this week. If I'm still getting 9.5, and certainly if I'm getting more, I'm taking the Huskies. I'll take those points all day long in that matchup.
Well, I'm going to take Ryan McGee because he just
joined us here on the on the Zoom. Never a 9-point underdog in our hearts.
Oh, wow. Thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
What a great intersection of your worlds, Ryan McGee. Mike Elko from your beloved Carolinas going to Texas A&M, one of your beloved SEC stops and one of the rowdiest Marty and McGee settings, I believe, this year. I am curious your thoughts as someone who probably has gotten to know Mike Elko a good bit from Wake Forest, then Duke, obviously, and it would take a podcast miniseries, probably true crime, really, to figure out how to fix Texas A&M. That's probably a good February pod for us, but I would be curious what you think of Mike's chances there in that hire.
Well, first of all, no one's ever fixed Texas A&M, so it's going to, it's Dana Bible, I think, was the last one that fixed Texas A&M. But it's Mike is an extremely likable guy. I mean, as you experience when you did game day at Duke, and it's I'm sad to see him leave my corner of the world, but I'm also excited to have him in my business corner of the world. Marty and I get to do those talking season specials where we sit down with every coach in the SEC. And we've had a couple of years where there's only one new guy. And next year we're going to have to reintroduce ourselves to like half the conference and we'll not have to introduce myself to Mike Elko. And so I'm excited to see him there. I think it's a good fit. I was shamelessly banging the Jeff Traylor drum just because why not, right? And their biggest challenge at A&M, I think we talked about on the pod, is reestablishing their connections with all these high school coaches who were so angry because Jimbo, fair or unfair, just they felt like wasn't paying any attention to him. Mike Elko will fix that. I mean, he knows how to play the game and not just play the football game. He knows how to play the political game. And so, and again, extremely likable. So I'm curious to see and anxious to see how quickly he slides in there. And but it is, listen, you guys know this. I grew up going to games at Duke. It's a little different in College Station, and so it'll be interesting to see how he fits all the other stuff. I think he can, but just down the road, Mac Brown loves to tell the stories about when he went to Texas from North Carolina after winning a lot of games at North Carolina, but realizing that was as good as he could do there. Mm-hmm. And when he went to Texas and it was all the other stuff, and how your pie chart goes from a lot of football and a little bit of other stuff to a lot of other stuff and hopefully squeezing in a little bit of football. And so I'm curious to see if they'll let and this is what Ross Bjork wanted, was a CEO guy. And I think he got a guy who could do that. But I think being a CEO at Texas A&M is a little different than it is being a CEO at other places.
There are not only the generational challenges of the fact that they haven't won a national championship since 1939, and they haven't won a conference championship this century. 1998, when they upset Kansas State in the Big 12, is the last one. Haven't played for a championship in the SEC and have barely threatened. But at this moment in time, the A&M job is even harder than it has been, because unlike since 2012, when Texas A&M emerged from Texas shadow, they were in the stronger conference. They were in the more prestigious conference. They didn't have to function as little brother within their own state anymore, or didn't have to, have the T-SIPs, as they call them, lord over them, their perceived superiority, even if it was imagined. Now they go back. They're in the same conference with Texas. They're coming off a year in which Texas is likely to have won a conference championship and very possibly will be in the college football playoff. There are no more divisions, so it's not just dealing with Alabama and LSU in the division. Now you're dealing with Texas. Now you're dealing with Oklahoma again, which is also an issue. And oh, by the way, you're also dealing with Georgia. And you're also dealing with Tennessee if they keep going. And Eli Drinkwitz up there just won 10. So and what if Florida gets it going again? Which there are no signs of that right now, but that's for a different podcast. The Texas A&M job right now is even harder than it was when Jimbo took over. And I'm curious about Mike Elko's decision, because I think that his reputation is such that there might have been not necessarily easier jobs, but jobs that might have been better fits that might come open on the horizon. What if Jim Harbaugh goes to the NFL? That's the perfect job for Mike Elko.
Yeah.
That is the perfect job for Mike Elko. You know, there are a couple of others. I don't want to say a couple of the others that come to mind, but because they're currently filled, and I hope they continue to be. But I've wondered about that. I understand what Pete and I were talking about this before you started, that you have to strike. You've got the financial resources at A&M. It is potentially a great job if you are the one who can be the fixer, as Nick Saban was at LSU, who finally figured it out. Eventually, somebody's going to figure it out at A&M, and Mike Elko might well be that guy. And if he does, it will be spectacular. But there are challenges, old challenges that haven't been there the last decade, that are reemerging starting next year. And then there are added ones that you don't get to lop off Georgia, Tennessee, and Florida and worry about them later at the end. Now you have to deal with them all season long within your conference.
Well, and I'm really, really curious to talk to him about, I mean, you're talking about what it was like at the start of the Jimbo Fisher era. Mike was there. Mm-hmm. And so I'm curious to see how different it is, because he's going to know it. I mean, he walked into the building today, and as soon as he actually goes to work, it's going to be really interesting when again, the first time I'll probably talk to him at any length will be in July. And I can't wait to ask him, all right, how different is it? And how different is the atmosphere? I mean, I wrote a story just a couple of years ago where I drove from, it was week one, and it was a Thursday night season opener at College Station. And then I drove over to Austin and kind of did the whole, is it still really a rivalry? And are people ever going to care when we didn't know it was coming back? Now it's back. And so, all right, how much has that changed, and how much has that job changed? And also, you guys know this, how different is I call it the Richie Pettibone rule, right? The longtime coordinator for Joe Gibbs became the head coach of the Redskins, had no idea what the hell he was doing. And so, I'm curious to see what Mike Elko, how different is that job when you move down the hallway, from the nice office to the office. And so it's going to be an interesting question that you just asked, Rece, which is how different is it versus, when they all first loaded up in there, a few years ago.
So Pete, I've got great confidence in him. I mean, I really like Mike Elko, and
Me too.
I think he can handle a really big job. I don't want that misunderstood. I just think that this one comes with some brand new challenges, inherent challenges, brand new ones, and some old ones that have reared their ugly heads for generations that are back now, meaning Texas specifically, and also OU.
Let me give you a little portrait of Mike Elko, and I think A&M fans who know him but may appreciate this. So I first met Mike Elko. It was the Sunday after a Michigan game 10, 12 years ago. He was Dave Clawson's defensive coordinator at Bowling Green. I went down there. Clawson had BG hot to do a profile of him. And I sat down in Elko's office, and I'll never forget this for the rest of my career. He had a bag of McDonald's sitting on his desk. All right. And when the grease seeps through the brown bag, he was like busy working, and there was just this like grease stain on the bag. And that was my, like, literally, Pete, nice to meet you, Mike. My first impression is like this guy with the fast food grease seeping through. And Elko's a really interesting guy. He's from South Jersey. He grew up in a trailer park. His mom had him when she was 16. I think his dad worked for the post office. No, his dad worked for Amtrak, and his mom worked for the post office. It's one of those two I may have. Dad worked for Amtrak, mom worked for the post office. And just obviously came from humble beginnings. Then he went to Penn. All right. I want to say he was there with one of Trump's kids, but he was like, all of a sudden you get put in this different incubator, right? And in a totally different class situation. He had to figure out how to survive. I believe he played safety at Penn. And the thing about Mike Elko that I've appreciated getting to know him at all these different stops is he's got a high intellect. He's a really good poker player, and he used to go play in when he was at Hofstra. He used to go play in. He always says they weren't high stakes games because he didn't have enough money at the time. But he would go in some of those like barroom, basement barroom things. He's a smart guy. Who's an unbelievable defensive play caller. But he's also just been able to figure it out. And it says something about coaching if you're at stops where you can figure it out. Dave Clawson's one of the great figure it out guys of this generation, right? Like he may not ever put himself in position to coach a playoff team, although he would have with Wake the last couple of years. But he has gone to difficult places and figured out how to win. Fordham being one of them, Bowling Green. So Mike Elko has been there and seen how to, maximize resources at places that don't have them. And so now that you're at a place that's underachieved, that has the resources, the case for Mike Elko at A&M and why I think he'll be successful there is because he has the anticipation, vision, and raw intellect to figure it out. The guys who we've run across who have had the most relentless high-end success are often the smartest guys.
My favorite guys are the ones who, maybe it's because of the college campuses I grew up on, but I love Mike Elko. That's why I've always enjoyed Chip Kelly, which is the guys who came from. I mean, Mike Elko 2 decades ago was defensive coordinator at the Merchant Marine Academy. I mean, and so you know what that meant? That meant he had to do laundry, and that meant that he had to paint the lines on the field and help. That meant that he had to help run the cables for the headsets before the game, like being a high school coach. And so I love those guys that had to do their thing. I remember Joe Morehouse telling a story about when he was coming up and he and his wife doing the laundry for the team the Friday night before a game because the laundry guy never showed up. But I love guys that work their way up, and I love the guys that have always coached at Power 5, top shelf, whatever, their entire career. But I think there's something to be said for, the fact that, and this is not a knock on Toledo at all, but the fact that Saban brings up Toledo a lot. Right. And Saban brings up the fact that he played at Kent State a lot. And so I love the guys that are always in touch with the roots, that they came from, particularly when, it's D3 and it's D2, or it's Ivy League, or it's somewhere where, like you say, they had to do everything because there's not much they can throw at him at Texas A&M that he won't at least know how to process. It's a little different, I understand, when you got to go to the governor's wife's birthday party, because it's in your contract versus, painting the lines on the field at Merchant Marine Academy. But the fact of the matter is he can handle about anything.
Because I've brought up the challenges at Texas A&M, I do want to say that I think from Ross Bjork's standpoint and from A&M's standpoint, they hit a home run here. Now,
he's a great hire.
Honesty compels me to say I thought the same thing when they hired Jimbo. But even though he worked for Jimbo, he's a completely different guy, as we've outlined here. And I think it is an absolute home run hire, and probably one that is a more creative approach to hire than what appeared to be his initial attempt to hire in Mark Stoops. I think Mark Stoops is a terrific football coach, but because of the challenges that I've outlined earlier, maybe an Elko who might look at things in different ways because of the varied experiences, and also because he has actually been at A&M, which is not for long, but he was there, and that is a different place. Now, Mark Stoops,
4 years, Rece.
Yeah, Mark Stoops is a guy who can adapt. Mark Stoops is a guy who's won at Kentucky for a long period of time where people haven't done that. He's a terrific football coach, and he would have made A&M much, much better. But this hire is both really smart and a home run, and from a background fit perspective, and a little outside the box. It's like just enough outside the box to have a chance to be really successful. But I do think that there are huge challenges that haven't been there the last few years that are returning and will. Remains to be seen how A&M navigates them. The one thing Elko will do that A&M never really seemed to do for any extended period of time under Jimbo is that he'll have them unified and he'll have them believing. I know that's overused Ted Lasso kind of stuff, but when we were at Duke before the Notre Dame game, they played great. I mean, all of these guys that he was maximizing them, and he made them confident in their own abilities so that they could play at a really high level and a competitive level against the better teams. Because of his personality, because while is an affable guy that's easy to get along with, he's tough, man. I mean, he is no shrinking violet. He is not afraid, and they will do it. They will do it his way, and they will believe, which is the most important part of college football coaching. They will believe that he is being hard on them for their own good. And if you can do that, that's how you get teams to play hard. And it is when they believe the players, I mean, they don't believe that you have their best interest at heart. That is when teams get fractured. And I think that's where Elko will do a very, very good job and probably be evident in really short order in College Station after he takes over.
I'm excited.
I think the case that A&M fans should be heartened on is
he took a underachieving Duke roster that was 3-9 the year before. He took a couple guys from the portal, but he didn't take, this wasn't Coach Prime, right? Or Texas State. This was, he cherry picked a handful. You can't do that at Duke. And he took that team and they went 9-4. And it was basically comprised of the same players. For all we talk about scheme and X's and O's and stuff like that, the root of great college coaches is connection. And Mike Elko clearly connected and motivated a roster that wasn't. I think it's probably pretty fair to say that this Texas A&M roster is not connected or motivated right now. They are well compensated, and I don't know all the contractual obligations to NIL, but some of those guys may be more swayed to stay than to go. But his ability to go there and quickly unify and keep a very strong roster together. What did Lane Kiffin say? It's an NFL roster.
Yeah.
Look at that D line. If you're Mike Elko, I would expect Elijah Robinson to stay or to make a lot of money going somewhere else. He's going to be, the most coveted assistant on this in this market. I really feel like that is his first challenge, and that's something we've seen him do resplendently in the last couple of years.
Well, and I think I told you guys I was on their sideline at Ole Miss, and I was, again, the first half was a hot mess. And I thought, okay, they're going to check out now. This is a bunch of renegades and they're a piecemeal roster, and they don't really care. But they played hard in the second half, and I watched how they interacted, and it was like a football team, as opposed to just a bunch of hired guns. And so I was impressed by that. I mean, first of all, just off the bus, they look talented. I mean, they passed the eye test. But in the second half of that game, I was pleasantly surprised in person what I, quite frankly, watching on television did not think existed. And maybe it was a little bit of circling the wagons because at that point, the talk was pretty hot about is Jimbo going to come back and can this team win a game? And so if he can keep a few of those key guys in there, the rebuild might not be as bad as everyone thinks it's going to be.
For Duke, too, not only have they found – I know Elko was a hot coordinator, but they gave him his chance, and he excelled. They lose their coach. From what the quarterback rumor mill says, it sounds as if their quarterback is a coveted commodity who is being pursued by some of the likely candidates that you would imagine. But hey, the good news for Duke is they still have baseball, and I imagine that the basketball team might still be okay too. Ryan, because you are Serendipity is your middle name. Yeah. I have to imagine, since you were in Jordan-Hare on Saturday, I rather imagine that you were standing in the left corner of that end zone right in front of Isaiah Bond. I haven't really looked at the tape closely, but I have to feel like you were standing right there because that's usually where you wind up on things like that.
Yeah, it wasn't. But Greg Sankey likes to joke that every time he watches any SEC story documentary, I was at the game, even if it was in 1948, and it was I was interviewing Bobby Dodd on the sideline. But no,
it is really interesting because I see these and I see your historical perspective, and I was like, wait, how was Ryan at the game? And the Bobby Dodd Bear Bryant game when they were throwing liquor bottles and Bryant wore the helmet. How was Ryan at that game yet also wasn't born?
Yeah,
it's kind of amazing.
And I was also at the Streamline Hotel when NASCAR was founded, right? I mean, I was there for all that stuff. Yeah. I'm amazed and I used to always joke, and my wife looked at me one day during the CFP 150, and we were fortunate to work on so many projects, and Rece, you and I were on those roundtables together. Yeah. And I told some story about Bobby Dodd or whatever. They used it. My wife looked at me and she goes, "Thank goodness." I said, "What?" She goes, "You were finally able to tell these stories, all these books you've read your whole life." I'm like, yeah. So we're finally giving the gift. But man, there is something about that game and that stadium. All due respect to Bryant Denny and the Iron Bowl is the Iron Bowl, and even Legion Field. I mean, Bo Over the Top, which I talked about a lot, over the weekend. But Hugh Freeze, to his credit, after what he called was the most devastating loss of his career, which, by the way, was his second loss to New Mexico State in as many years. The first one was at Liberty, and the next one was at Auburn.
And he also lost that game at Ole Miss on that Hunter Henry play with Alex Collins, too.
Yeah. No, it's just, but I talked to him very early in the week. And as you know, Hugh can be very cagey, and you have to kind of work on him a little bit to get him to tell you something. It sounds like he's telling you something, but he's not. And then once he tells you something, it's usually really good. But he talked about, he said, we're going to throw Iron Bowl history at them this week. He said, because I need a mental reset. We got to flush New Mexico State. But he said, I also have a lot of guys who are either young or have transferred in, and they're not from Alabama. They don't know what this game is. And so he brought in former players. He pulled out the archive footage. He, of course, showed them kick six probably 50 times. And Rece, on Saturday morning, I held the kick six football in my hand, and I have no emotional connection to that game. You do? I don't. Obviously, I just love it as a football fan. But to hold the kick six ball in your hand, and it's still scuffed up. It's still, and it's an Alabama football, which the Alabama fans are very quickly to point out, when I posted a picture of it. But to hold that ball in your hand, and that's the moment I believe, you know what, we might actually see a football game tonight. And then obviously got one that was, it was one of the, all due respect to kick six, all due respect to all of them, there was not a crazier finish than that we saw on Saturday. It didn't make any sense. There aren't a lot of moments like that. I go back to, Tua in the national championship game. There are only a couple of moments where your brain can't process. Did this just happen? Did the game just end? And it was the most stunning 40 seconds I think I've ever watched.
The guys on game day, sort of chuckle because I keep referring to Jordan-Hare as a haunted mansion.
It is.
It is mostly centered around the Iron Bowl.
Yeah.
But there have been so many weird games there over the years. I don't know why. Maybe it's just the intensity of rivalry games for Auburn, because in fairness, most of them are the Iron Bowl, but their other big rival is Georgia. And a lot of them have been around, centered around Georgia, whether it was prayer at Jordan-Hare or the game in the 90s that ended on the goal line with, I think it was Ray Goff telling him, to lie down, and, stay on the ground. I think that was it. You probably remember better than I, but there was a big four overtime game there. There was the Bryce Young game there a couple of years ago.
What was the barn game? The
barn
literal
game.
Barn
LSU
burner,
caught on fire.
LSU. Yep.
There was an LSU game there where Walker Howard's dad, Jamie Howard, threw 6 interceptions, threw out 4 pick sixes in the fourth quarter. In the LSU Auburn game. So there have always been these crazy occurrences in that game, and it was also, I know you don't like this, it was also a weirdly, if not poorly officiated game, from the, blatant miss on the face mask for Alabama early. And then, there was, roughing plays away from it. There were, everything about Saturday in that game, from game management to passes past the line of scrimmage by, seemingly 15 yards down the field. I engage in hyperbole from Milroe, and he raises up and throws the ball. It was a weird game from pretty much from the time that Alabama had a touchdown call back on the hold and then shanked the punt. From that point forward, it was theater of the bizarre. And, and Auburn played their tails off.
Yeah. And it was interesting being there in the morning, because it had an uneasy excitement about it, if that makes any sense. Like the Auburn fans, like I was fortunate enough to work on this story about the kick six, and you guys ran on a game day and we ran on at SEC Nation, and it was interesting because we ran it on the big screen and the crowd started reciting Rob Bramblett's call, as we played it on the big screen, and they're crying and the whole deal. And I started talking to the fans when after I did the tag to the piece, and like 6 different people said to me, I don't think we're going to win tonight. And then they looked at me and they go, but after I watched that, I believe we can. And I think there's something to that, because the stadium was engaged. The town was engaged, but it was weirdly quiet on Saturday morning. And that ramped up, obviously, by the time, the game got to kickoff. But it was like being in line for the Haunted Mansion. Like, half the people are excited and half the people are scared because they don't know what they're going to see. And then, by the time it's over with, it was weird and everybody had a good time for the most part. And so it was an uneasy excitement all day long. And obviously it was rewarded at the end, but again, the three of us have been fortunate to watch a lot of football, an almost unhealthy amount of college football. Right. And I'm trying to think of a game where you're 2 days later, your brain still can't quite process. I've gone back and watched the highlights 4 or 5 times because I want to make sure I remember this right, because I do this thing, I don't know if you guys do, where I watch a play and I immediately move on to the next play. And so it's hard for me sometimes to recall everything, when the game's over. I watch those highlights over and over and over again because I can't believe what I just saw. Right.
Yeah.
Can I give my random kick six memory from that game?
Please.
So I was actually on the field when it happened, on the sideline. And so I was on the right side, I believe, of the Auburn sideline. And he ran Chris Davis ran right by me. And then the sideline swells out. So I was actually like 10 yards on the field so I could get like a view of whether or not this was going to happen. Now, again, he's 60 yards away from me. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't in the play, but to actually watch it, I had to go. So anyway, pandemonium breaks out. And I always use this line. I'm sure Rece has heard me say in the podcast. What do I remember about this game, this moment, 5 years, 10 years from now? I remember a gratuitous amount of fireball nips on the field after I went to interviews and came back. Gratuitous amount of fireball nips. I remember haphazard socks, cigars, shoes, and the people who were still there were all taking their family Christmas card photos. You could tell they were mom was lining them up. Hey, we got to get this right for grandma. Get the scoreboard in the background.
That's the best. That's absolutely well. And it was fun reliving those with everyone. You talking about the football. So we were talking about me holding the kick six football that the great Kirk Sampson, brought over. Well, that ball disappeared for a long period of time. And Chris Davis is the one that told us that he received a phone call a few years later, and it was Jay Jacobs, which can be a divisive name when you throw it out to Auburn people. Oh, by the way, y'all, he also helped you win a national championship, but that's neither here nor there. But Jay had moved on to Florida, and the football was in a desk drawer. And so, Chris, do you want this ball or should we return it to the university? And Chris was like, we should go back to the school. And they display it, but only occasionally, because Pete remembers this. I wrote a story several years ago about when O.J. Simpson's, the USC version of O.J.'s Heisman, was stolen right there from their Hall of Champions,
Heritage Hall.
You should sit out there in Heritage Hall, and so Auburn is nervous to put it on display because they might end up with a Mission Impossible heist type deal. But it's
like a Russian jewel. It only goes to certain exhibits in fine art museums in high class cities around the country.
But Chris said that was the one thing he wished he could have back was the celebration, and he was angry. If you watch the video, he's very angry when we finally see him because his teammates piled up on him, and it was like it's like a College World Series dog pile. He thought he was going to get hurt. He had 10 people piled up, but he lost the ball in the middle of all that. And Jay Jacobs was standing in the end zone, just quietly picked up the football and eased out the door. And so, in more ways than one, but now the football is back where it should be. And Kirk Sampson, I said, it's like the football at the White House, what they call it, the briefcase with the launch codes. Kirk Sampson literally is carrying the football around. When Marty and I held it, and Marty Smith goes, "We should have white gloves on right now." Because but very Rece, very typical Alabama fans, right? I post a picture, and the immediate response was, "Well, that's an Alabama football." Yes, we know Alabama fans because
I don't know why
and then they took it away.
I don't know why. I don't know why they would want to claim that's one you'd want to.
It was weird.
Want to put to the side. Why Alabama would care about that. The one thing, though, that I have heard people bring up from the Alabama standpoint is they've kind of been paying a penance since then, especially the last 2 visits from Alabama where they have snatched defeat from the jaws of victory.
All-timers.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of all-timers. Isaiah Bond says he doesn't know where the ball is, so maybe you'll have another story for that one that comes up in a few years. But you know what? The one thing about that play at the end, and I remember in the preseason, we were talking about who's going to be the quarterback at Alabama. And we were raving over Jalen Milroe's physical prowess if they could find an offense that worked for him. That was not a Hail Mary.
No.
That was not a prayer. It was a great play.
Yep.
And, and you can argue all day that Auburn should have defended it better, all of that kind of stuff. That was an absolute seed and a dime that he threw in the one spot. Because when he let it go, I was like, well, that's out of the end zone. And I mean, it was a great catch and a better throw.
It was a great call too, by the way.
Spectacular.
It's a great call.
Isaiah Bond.
That's
when I see Gary, I can tell him, but it's and we'll all see him this weekend, obviously down in Atlanta. But it is. But I can tell you this again, as the son of a field judge, tackle that guy. If you think that ball's coming in there, rip his jersey off, knock him down, make them
commit a felony.
Exactly right. My dad always said his rule on pass interference, and he was a downfield official, was he would not throw the flag unless he was throwing it into a pool of blood. He just didn't. He didn't believe in ticky-tack pass interference. Knock the guy out, and then take your chances on the second play. At the time, I understand it's very easy for me to say that, having not been on that play. But yeah, it's
you can correct me on the rule. I mean, he should have. I agree, but it would have been 4 plays then.
Yes.
Right. Or it means they could get off because first.
But they still got to go 15 yards too. Right. It was and goal from the 31, right?
In the end zone, though. In the end zone, Ryan, Mr. Official, ball spotted on on the 2.
Right.
But on the 2.
But still, I'll take my chances on that. But
absolutely.
But you also are thinking at this point, there's no way the ball's going to drop. There's no way no way this play is going to end up with it. But because it was just, again, your brain has a hard time processing.
The rivalry thing, which I think for the course of his career, Saban has downplayed to a degree, because he's about process and about playing to the level and all of those things, at least publicly. It's one of the rare times that in the post-game news conference that I've heard him acknowledge anything, because someone threw out, and look, he knows this. He even admitted they had good fortune. They did make a play like that after the snap and the penalty and all of that to pull it off. You have some good fortune. And someone asked him about luck. And I don't know who asked him the question, but he immediately recognized that there was an Auburn tie. And he kind of gave him the look and said, you all like to celebrate the kick six. And then he went chapter and verse of all of the things that went against them in 2013. It was like, okay, you haven't admitted this rivalry, but that one's been sitting there for a while, and now's your opportunity to respond to it. And he didn't miss. And, I don't mind it when the coaches, like Ohio State and Michigan coaches typically aren't shy about doing that. There's been a history of sometimes when you're in the Alabama-Auburn situation, where at least certainly in the Saban era, for Alabama, winning is more of a relief than a cause for jubilation. And, so for him to acknowledge that, I thought was pretty interesting. Or maybe it was just the typical reporter's question. Nothing wrong with the question, by the way. There was nothing at all wrong with it. But
there was some luck involved.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. As there was for kick six, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of it, because the game probably should have been put away. Yeah. But so, that is part of the game, though. Luck is part of the game. Good fortune, a little serendipity. You need something on your side every now and then. But it was interesting to see that bubble up in that moment in the aftermath. And he wasn't disrespectful to the guy, but he sort of said, I've had it go both ways over the course of my long career. There have been some things that have gone against us at certain times too. So
that's why I love new Saban. I always talk about post-COVID Saban. Post-COVID Saban now allows himself that moment. And I feel like he has enjoyed – I know he's enjoyed coaching more than he did before, because he's told me that. But I'll never forget talking to him. We had him on Marty McGee, and it was the week leading up to the playoff in 2020. And him talking about spending Christmas with the guys, and him talking about that season and getting emotional, and him joking with us. And he would have never joked with anyone, maybe Miss Terry, in the days leading up to, I think it was the day after Christmas, the days leading up to a college football playoff semifinal. And so he still is as intense as ever, but I think he allows himself now to at least enjoy with the moment. And when he first sat down in the press conference, he just kind of started laughing, because I think he acknowledged what we all did, which was, what in the world did any of us even witness? And so I think he's allowing himself to enjoy it just a little more. Carl Yastrzemski always said he wishes he could go back and he would actually try to enjoy himself as opposed to just being miserable all the time, worried about, he went, he shouldn't have swung on that pitch on so-and-so and so-and-so and it eat him up for a week. And I think Nick Saban now is allowing himself to enjoy it a little more, which is good to see. And meanwhile, he still is, contending for national championships.
Theater of the absurd.
That's it.
Rivalry week again, delivered everywhere, whether it was Washington's fourth down call and game-winning field goal against Wazoo, who was trying to send them out with a loss. The extended rivalry of Bedlam that I referenced earlier, that Oklahoma State sort of just dangled it out there that Oklahoma might make it into the Big 12 title game and then took it away by beating BYU and getting there. Florida trying to spoil things for Florida State, but coming up short again. And Ohio State losing to Michigan is the only thing that really changed anything about the college football playoff picture. And we knew going in that something was going to change as a result of that. And the Buckeyes have been effectively eliminated from the picture. Wolverines all but have one of the spots sewn up, and the rest of it is up for grabs. The entire season has basically stayed on script until this week. And we'll be here all week, couple more times on the College Game Day podcast to sort it all out. More coaching changes coming. We'll spend some time talking about some of the other ones later in the week as well. Ryan, always great to see you. Thanks for being with us. We'll be back on the College Game Day podcast on Wednesday. We encourage you to subscribe so that you never miss an episode, or download it wherever you prefer to get your podcast. Have a great week.